Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on issues and opportunities going on in the community, as well as people and stories from the present and the past. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 52, our guest today is David Abatelli. He's the former Greenport Village administrator, and we talked to him about his ancestry and his childhood in Queens. He shares stories of his time in the Navy and his journey to the east end of Long Island, initially settling in Hampton Bays before moving to Greenport, where he became actively involved in the community. David also discusses the challenges the village faced and the improvements made during his tenure. Additionally, he shares his hope for the future of the North Fork. So I hope you enjoy episode 52 with David Abatelli. This episode was recorded May 9th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Oh, thank you.
So to start off, could you give us a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised?
Okay. Well, I think as many people who are here in Greenport now, I was born and raised in Bayside, Queens, and lived there until I was about 21. But my family also had a house in Hampton Bays that actually my father purchased in the 40s. Mm. So I spent every summer there in Hampton Bays. So I had that double situation.
Yes. And in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go on both of your parents' side?
I guess again into the 40s or pre-40s with my father. My father is an immigrant from Sicily, and he came here with his older brother. And my mother was born in the United States, but both of her parents were from Italy, and she grew up in Astoria, Queens. And then that's basically that. I mean, they got married in, I guess, the 40s, kind of around the time of the war, of World War II.
What about, so when did your father come over?
So he would have come over, he was born in 1900. So he would have come over when he was a late teenager with his older brother. So that would have been about the 20s, somewhere in there. And he didn't get married till he was, I think, he was 16 years older than my mother. So he was probably into his mid to late 30s when he got married. I think an important thing that happened around that time is my mother had a younger sister and a younger brother, and her parents, both had to work, to survive. And there was, this was after the Depression and all that. But the son, who my mother mostly brought up, because she was, the parents were out, she was the oldest of them, that he died in World War II as a Navy pilot. And that was very devastating for my mother and actually the whole family. But, my mother carried that really through her.
Yes.
Through her life. So that actually shapes some other things that involve my future, too, that I can get into when I get into what I did.
Yes. So. And I was just curious, do you know where your father was born in Sicily?
He was born in Sicily. Yeah, it's kind of near Palermo.
Oh, okay.
I've never been there. My older brother has been there, actually, to the house and, with the family, and he even still communicates with some of the members of that family.
Mm-hmm.
But his brother, my father's older brother, who kind of brought him, the
With
two of
him.
them came, but he was the older one.
Yeah.
He was pretty important in the family. He had a lot of children. He got married, had a lot of children. He actually got married a couple of times. And that's what he pretty early, I guess it would have been certainly in the 50s, lived in Queens, but also had a house in Cutchogue.
Mm.
And then one of his sons, who were, again, like pretty old, these are now, to me, these were all my uncles, had a house in Mattituck. So that's kind of the double connection of Queens and then our family being out here.
Mm-hmm.
My father had a house and my two uncles. So
Yes.
two on the North Fork, one on the South Fork.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up with that,
Yes.
with back and forth.
Mm-hmm. And did your father's, with his brother came over, but did they say the reason why? Was it for like economic or?
Yeah, I've thought about that, but first of all, not only was I not born, but then even once I was born, I wouldn't really care about that kind of stuff.
It wasn't something you thought about asking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was before the war, but it was before World War II that they came, so they weren't like escaping, from the Nazis or whatever. I don't think. I don't think it was that much. I don't know exactly what was going on. I don't think Italy was a particularly wonderful place to live politically in those 20s and 30s, which would have been the time they would have gotten out, or
and
decided to leave. But a lot of the family still is there. It was a pretty big family.
Okay.
They had, they actually had olive plantations, and they owned a fair amount of property. And actually, there's even a museum that's there that was part of a building that the family owned. And then after the war, after World War II, I think it was bombed, but then it was restored then as a museum.
Oh.
So, I don't know a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But my brothers, if you want to interview my brother sometime, he could tell you a lot about it.
Okay.
A lot about that, because he also was a history teacher and really loved that kind of stuff,
Yes.
of knowing why does everything happen,
Yes.
type of thing.
And so what did your father do for work?
He was a wine salesman. He worked for a wine company in New York. It was called G&D, or Gambarelli and DeVito was the name. All I remember about that was that Gallo was like their big competitor, and Gallo still exists, and Gambarelli and DeVito doesn't anymore. So whatever that means.
Yeah.
But that also, I think, was important in the North Fork, South Fork connection, because my father's area that he would be the salesman for was all of Suffolk and a part of Nassau County.
Oh.
So he had to travel out here all the time. So he was constantly, driving. He drove, driving out all around the island.
Yeah.
And liked it out here. And that's what, so virtually every vacation I ever went on from the time I was born until my father died, which that's, I guess, a bit of a story too, but was based on him coming out here, and his time off or vacation type things would be out here as a very active fisherman and sportsman. We could go duck hunting. He was very into that. He rode horses, dogs. He was basically like a sportsman.
Yes.
Until he got married, and especially once he started having kids, then
kind of slowed down.
My mother brought him back home.
Yeah.
So
But maybe some of the things he, early on in Sicily, maybe that he enjoyed there, he wanted to do. It probably reminded him a little bit of doing some things
more
else.
in the country. I don't think he was like a huge fan of like the city, you know.
Because he probably came in through there and...
Right, yeah. The whole immigration thing with Ellis Island. And
Yeah.
I don't know, my brother has looked up, you know, the Ellis Island and looked them up.
The records. And so was your mom more stay at home, or did she work?
She didn't work until my father died. My father died in 1960, so I was only 10. He was 59 at the time, and my brother was 16. He's 6 years older than me.
Okay.
So up until when he died, which was a sudden heart attack, so there was, from as far as my perspective, or even my mother to a large extent, there was really no warning. You know, he didn't feel well for a couple of days, and then one day he felt really bad, and she took him just to the doctor, and then from the doctor, I think he kind of died while the doctor was driving to the hospital to bring him to the hospital. So it was a very, you know, and that's like 1960, so it still was before really we had serious, you know, EMTs and, you know, call 911 type of things like that. Things, you know, it wasn't as fast. So, you know, so.
But what did she end up doing when she had to start working? Yeah,
so that's, it's interesting. My father was very active with the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And after he died, you know, there was a lot of sympathy for our family because now it's my mother, you know, still relatively young, 2 young boys. You know, he was clear. My father was clearly the breadwinner. My mother really didn't work at all. Her, you know, my father felt, you know, her job was taking care of the 2 kids, the 2 boys.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's what she wanted to do and all that. So he had, I guess my father had friends that were also boaters, and I guess this was the time after the war, you know, the Navy, Coast Guard, stuff like that. So I guess one of his friends, knowing that my mother really needed to work, you know, at some point, you know, we had the support from the family. I mean, we weren't like destitute and like living on the street. You know, my grandfather actually paid off our mortgage on the house in Bayside. So that took that burden away from her. So we didn't have to like move. You know, we were able to stay in the house we were living in.
Yeah.
So anyway, one of my father's friends was I guess a Navy officer working at the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point. And he was able to get my mother a job. She did have to take civil service tests and stuff like that, but she did that pretty, you know, without, I mean, she was smart, I mean, you know, but she never went to college, but she was a good high school student at least, you know.
Yeah.
And she knew how to type, and, you know, she could do things which I think most women during that period would, you know, in school, all they'd really learn how to do was sew or type. You know, there weren't a lot of training.
Yeah.
So she got a job at Kings Point Merchant Marine Academy and worked there from probably in like 61 or so, like within a year or so of my father dying, until my brother and I left. My brother left first. He went to college, became a teacher. I taught in the Bronx in high school, and I then actually, I guess that could take me into my Navy career. So you know, so that starts to get into my adult life.
Okay.
So do you have any other?
I did have
youth questions.
Yes. So what was the name of where you were growing up?
In Queens, Bayside.
Bayside, Queens. So even as a child or into your teens, what kind of activities would you do outside of school or on weekends within the neighborhood? Or
Okay, so Not a lot. I guess most kid stuff, but well, I went to a parochial grammar school, which was like a block away from my house. So, so that was one thing. So I had nuns to deal with, growing up, which was, not great. I wasn't a big fan of that, but got through that. Generally, there was a park very close also to us, was Croshawn Park, and it's also near Little Neck Bay is close. That was within walking even, or certainly bicycle range of my house to go there. So I was always I'd like more outdoorsy kind of things. I wasn't really that into sports. I feel like I wasn't on, I could play baseball a little bit, but on a very low level. I was never on teams. Even in high school, I wasn't on any sports teams. Again, very different from my brother, who was very active, mostly in basketball in high school and even into college. And also he liked to play baseball, and he would be very into sports. He'd constantly know, what scores and different players and batting averages and stuff like that. I didn't really care at all about any of that stuff. So we were very different in what we were interested in. I liked riding a bike, doing winter fun stuff like skating and sleigh riding and just kind of fooling around. You know, not so much getting into trouble, but not necessarily doing things that were that productive. And then as a teenager, listening to music and stuff, that was in the Beatles time. I was a big Beatles guy and stuff like that. Even would want to talk like an Englishman and stuff like that. Like I sounded like I would come from England.
Yeah. And would you stay mostly within the Queens area? Would you go into Manhattan?
A little bit, yeah. My mother kind of, was used to, cause when she lived in Astoria growing up, that's very close to like the trains that you could take in and out of the city. And my grandparents always lived there that's my grandparents on my mother's side. I never knew my grandparents on my father's side. They're still, they stayed in Sicily.
Yeah.
So yeah, she would take me into the city. I didn't really go into the city that much myself, or even with my friends. We wouldn't so much do that. I remember the World's Fair. I guess it was in '64 or something like that. Whenever the New York World's Fair happened, that was like a big thing. I went there a lot. It was fairly close. It was easy to go to that. I know they just had like an anniversary. I was just reading about that. So that was a big thing that I remember. But really not super creative stuff. Go to the movies. It was kind of easy going. And the Hampton Bays thing, we went there all the time. I was there all summer. We would pack up. My father wouldn't stay all summer, but he would just drop us off there with my mother, sometimes my grandparents, and we'd be there all summer long. And then on weekends, all through the spring and the fall, we would go drive out to Hampton Bays and spend the weekends almost all the time. That actually caused problems, problems for my brother, because he wanted to be involved with these sports, sports that would often happen on weekends. So there'd be all these different little fights about that he doesn't want to go, he wants to stay, and so that was.
But you enjoyed going out there.
Yeah, I very much wanted to go. but I kind of a downside as time went on was we never went anywhere else. Yeah. Other people would go different vacations and travel around. So I only knew two places. I knew Hampton Bays and Southampton, Southampton Village, and that's a little world there.
Yeah.
And Bayside, that little world, and then.
Was Bayside, was that mostly Italian, or were there other?
No, it was pretty much a mix. It was mostly white, and middle class. We had a relatively nice house, really similar to houses that are around here, and the properties, relatively small lots. No big estates. You'd basically have enough room for the house and a parking and a garage and a driveway, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
But it was safe.
Yeah. And also, I was curious for family gatherings or family events. How was that in terms of even during holidays, or would you go over to like your grandma's house on Sunday?
Yeah, that's a biggie. Okay, wait. Yeah, because my father. There's just the two brothers who originally came here. So my father and my uncle, Will, his name was. So my father just had us two kids. My uncle, though, his brother had, I think, 9 kids, most of which were all boys and one girl. And he also had a couple of wives along the way.
Yeah.
So he also lived to be in his late 90s.
Wow.
And he also had the Abatelli real estate in Cutchogue that existed from around the 50s.
Oh.
So he opened that business here. And so with holidays, those were like big things because we had a really pretty big family, because especially on my father's side. My mother's side, it wasn't that big, but it still was. She had the one sister, basically, because she lost her brother in the war. So she had one sister. On my father's side, he had a lot of relatives because of all the kids, and these kids were now growing up. So they were all older than us. I have cousins who are older than me by a generation. So I had people calling my uncle, even though they were my cousin, and their children were like my age. So there was like a real age discrepancy that wasn't really bad. It was just confusing. My mother, for example, was the aunt to some of those brothers that were about her same age. So like the aunt and uncle idea was very confusing in our family. But it was fine. We just all had at different ages, and the same age groups hung out with each other. So yeah, there was a lot of family stuff. After my father died, though, that did go down a bit because a lot of the relatives were on his side. But there were a few that stayed, did stay close to us that we would still see on a regular basis. But it was less after he died.
Okay.
But they were, I guess, generally the traditional by the book kind of stuff.
Italian meals and...
Yeah, but there were also... there were some other nationalities as people got married.
Yes.
There was, some of the wives were from Puerto Rico. There were a couple of... So then there was some Spanish stuff going on. And
intermarriage.
Yeah, so it was diverse. It wasn't totally focused. And all of the Italian, not by birth, but by ancestry, weren't really that excited about being Italian. There was still some prejudices. Not really bad, but and there was some conflicts between Irish and Italian and stuff like that. So you just kind of wanted to be like an American. That's, I never spoke Italian. My brother, again, he did speak Italian.
Yeah.
He was able to speak Spanish and Italian, and when he was in high school, when he taught high school, he was like a bilingual teacher.
Yes.
So he, that's all. He was like the smarter brother. He was the smart one, and I wasn't as like I was the. Why couldn't you be like your brother kind of guy?
Oh. But let's say, well, now in school, how was school for you in terms of even your subject matter or core courses, and were you gravitating towards certain areas?
Not so, I guess a little bit. So grammar school with the nuns and stuff, that's kind of like a prison setting. You're just like forced to learn what you have to learn. Then I went to a public high school. I went to Bayside High School. So that was like a little different. First of all, it's a very big school. There was like, my graduating class was like 1,500 people. I mean, there was over 5,000 in the school. It was like, very different from the little Catholic school I went to that was around the corner from my house.
Yes.
It was a completely different world.
Were you more excited to go into that environment? Or was it a little bit of like...
It was just, different.
Yeah.
It was now you're not being told every single thing you have to do. You have to take the initiative. If you want to learn anything, you've got to take the initiative to study and take it upon yourself to make the effort to learn. So I wasn't really that great at that. And I think also a little bit, it's probably affected a little bit by losing my father. So, even though I wasn't super close to my father, I mean, I guess I was, but he just wasn't around a lot. He was
busy
worked all the
working.
time. He would work on weekends during, you're kind of like self-employed when you're a salesman like that.
Yeah.
The harder you work, the more you're out there. You got to, and so that was kind of limited.
Yeah.
So after he was gone, I mean, I felt like that was taken away from me, even though it wasn't a lot of time. The time we did spend together was good. I mean, it's not like I never saw him and he didn't like beat me up or anything like that.
Yeah.
He was a good father, but there just wasn't a lot of time.
Yeah. So where did you have kind of any idea what you were thinking of doing coming out of high school?
I guess, and I was thinking about this actually, well, recently now, as I knew I was going to be asked a question like that.
Yes.
So the only thing that really happened, I guess, was I think my last year of high school, where I was just struggling. I mean, I was getting through high school, but I wasn't, doing that well. Being probably a C average, if at best. Was mechanical drawing. I was taking this kind of, like structured drawing, of like different shapes and tools, things like that. So I was pretty good at that. I kind of like that. I was always interested in houses and cars and boats and things, and I would, sketch that kind of stuff just like at home. I'd do like kind of like art type stuff. So I had kind of an interest in that.
Yeah.
And I guess even in art in school, I was kind of, I didn't mind doing that. That seemed like a easy enough thing to do in high school, even though I was never very good at it, but I would like doing it, painting and drawing and stuff like that. Yeah. But I was particularly like the, more technical drawings, that, straight lines and using, angles and stuff like that, which, so that was basically it. So I really barely got out of high school. I mean, it was like an accomplishment to get out of high school. And I really didn't apply to any colleges. I didn't really particularly want to go to college. I just wanted to not have school anymore.
Yes.
The downside, the downside to that is the Vietnam War was going on. So this is now in the mid to late 60s. So I guess I graduated from high school in 67. So the war was still definitely on. The draft was still definitely on. A lot of people were getting drafted, and everybody's scrambling to figure out, how do I not get drafted? I mean, I knew people who did go to Canada and left the country. I wasn't going to do that. Other people who would deliberately get involved with serious drugs, like heroin and stuff like that, because that was another way to get out of the
to have
military.
Some type of medical or not qualified that way.
To find a way to get out, so you don't get drafted and go to Vietnam. And that's again now where what helped me. So I did go for 1 year to the Academy of Aeronautics, which is kind of like a trade school. It's not a full college, but it was like an advanced what I was learning in high school with the mechanical drawings. So this had to do with people who would work for, in a perfect world, like Grumman or a company like an airplane company, but at the very low level. You just be like designing like a wheel or a gear, or like the small parts that could be involved with an airplane. But it wasn't like I'd become like a aerospace engineer or anything like that. It was a very minimal, fairly easy school. And it was by LaGuardia Airport. It was located right by LaGuardia Airport. So I mostly enjoyed watching the planes take off and land. That's mostly what I did while I was there. So I did that for a year, but I really ended up kind of dropping out. Like I just didn't it wasn't really doing much for me. So now I was starting to get into trouble that I could get drafted. And that's where my mother at the Merchant Marine Academy, she was working with a lot of, Navy and Merchant Marine officers. The instructors there tended to be involved with the military. Mm-hmm. So she, her boss was, a commander in the Navy, and she, I think, especially because her brother was killed in World War II. What she didn't want to have happen, she really did not. My brother was safe because he's now a teacher in the city. Mm-hmm. He is exempt. He was in the clear, so she didn't have to worry about him. But she was worried about me getting drafted and then going to Vietnam and getting killed. That was her vision that she had. Mm-hmm. Especially Italian women would have that kind of vision for you.
Yes, they'll put it in your mind.
Right. So she asked, her boss, can you help my son, get into something, he said, because I didn't really want to desert. I didn't want to go to Canada or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I would, going into the Navy wouldn't have been like a bad thing as long as I didn't have to, go up into the Mekong Delta or something like that. Yeah. So he was able to, he knew about different jobs in the Navy and stuff like that. So he arranged, it's not even like it was like a secret thing, like you had to, but you needed some kind of, be an inside track to at least know what would be a likely safe job, as opposed to, a job that you're going to end up fighting. So there was one of the rankings or ratings, as I recall, was for ocean system technicians, which I didn't know what that meant. And he explained that it's basically, to make it sound good, it's kind of like what Jacques Cousteau does and stuff like that. If he is like the great undersea explorer. Yes. So he was kind of playing it up to me and to my mother that, it's a safe job. You do like research, you could be in different places, but that's a pretty good job. So I could kind of, this is the paperwork that we could fill out and put in for that rate for a ocean systems technician, as opposed to like an engineman or a flag guy or, all the different jobs there are in the Navy. Yeah. So that's what I did. And it was also in the Navy Reserve. So that's also was like a benefit, which was a little harder to get into reserves than regular Navy because you actually, with that, you only serve 2 years of active duty, but 4 years where you go to meetings and you have to go to a meeting every month, and then you go away for 2 weeks in the summer for some kind of training. So that was like a good thing for me. So that kind of turned the corner from me being like a dopey kid to now, okay, so this is now a real thing now I'm going to be doing. So that was pretty good. So
and with that, you were exempt from...
Yeah, so now I was safe from the draft. I wasn't going to be drafted anymore. Yeah. And then I just have to ride it out. I mean, so for 6 years, I'm committed to this. And that job was really good. So there's a whole story of how that then really helped and then brings me ultimately into Greenport. So I guess because of the reserve concept, once I signed up, I was now safe from being and sworn in and all that. I go to like a basic training. I'm now safe. I'm not going to get drafted. But I still didn't go anywhere. I was still basically at home, and I could have a job. I actually worked during that time. And I just had to go to meetings for a year.
So you still were living in Queens?
Yeah, so I was still living in Queens with basically now it's just me and my mother. Because my brother is now, I think he's basically even coming out of college. Yeah, he'd be out of college by then. And he was then actually moved to the Bronx and was teaching in the Bronx. So he was really out of the house at that point. So it was just me and my mother now at home in Bayside. And that was good. I worked a little bit with a friend of mine who was in the kind of landscaping business, or his father was. And then I also worked for a blueprint company, just kind of really not doing any, we would just make copies. So it was just kind of like a minimal job. Until then, after that year or so, then I had to do the active duty part of the Navy, which is now 2 years actually in the Navy like a real person. So this ocean systems technician job, I didn't know really what it would involve. And even when I went, then the first thing you do is you kind of go to these schools, they're called A schools, where you kind of learn what it is you're going to be doing. So I did that. Even through that, I didn't really learn anything specifically. It's a lot of just background stuff. And I knew it had to do with like sonar, the sonar systems. But after the training, which mostly happened in Key West, then my actual place where I was going to serve was in Bermuda. So that was like a good thing. That was that was a good situation, much better than Vietnam. If you have Vietnam or Bermuda, Bermuda's better. So, but there also were other places I could have been sent that weren't that good. Some are in really wild outpost areas, places like Midway, in the Pacific. It's like a little rock of an island. Keflavik, Iceland is another place where you could have gone. Adak, Alaska is another really, these are like the ones.
Much more isolated.
Yeah, these are ones that you don't want to go to. The Bermuda's a good one. There's a lot around. There's one in Nantucket. That would have been a good one. And actually, I did go to Nantucket on some of the trainings. Like after you do your full 2 years, you then every summer, you go to a place where your job would normally be, and you spend 2 weeks there to kind of refresh yourself. Because as a reservist, the idea is if something happens, if the war gets hot, or if the things happen, they bring you back.
Did you have to go to Annapolis?
No, that would be for officers.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I was just like a low-level guy, just basically a seaman, as they're called. They're just, you're basic. You're not a trainee anymore or a recruit or anything like that. This is your job, and it was pretty interesting. The job mostly involved with just you're monitoring all the activity in the ocean
within your area.
Yeah, generally within your area. And Bermuda is an important place because it's kind of out there. It's kind of not in the middle of the ocean, but it's like 500 miles off the coast. So you're monitoring the shipping, but mostly focused on submarines. Because they're the things that are hard to see. And our systems use underwater hydrophones, which are basically like microphones that listen, and you get that information of the boats, both on the surface and underwater, but we mostly were focused on the ones underwater because that's what we were concerned about. That was the danger, were the nuclear submarines. I mean, the Soviet, it was a pretty hot Cold War. There was a hot Cold War going on between the United States and Russia in the early 70s.
Okay.
I mean, it was going on through the 60s.
Even into the 70s.
Into the 70s. It kind of wound down in the 70s as Vietnam ended and Russia, the Soviet Union was breaking up. So things were getting safer. But the system was very important during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's, there was a lot of, worry and anxiety about that. But what was interesting, even after that, was resolved, there still were the submarines. There still were submarines off our coast, Soviet submarines that had, ballistic nuclear missiles that could fire those missiles into the United States. So it was part of our job is just kind of knowing where they were and working with the surface navy and the air flying, airplanes. You had to really know where they were. It
Yes.
was important. So that's what that job was. So it was kind of an important job. What also was a really good thing about the Bermuda, being stationed in Bermuda, is we were just in a single building on one end of the island. So I lived in a house, where I lived, we rented houses with other sailors, and we would live in a house. So we were kind of like, it's like a real job. You go home at night, where we have these shifts, so you're constantly working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But there's rotating, shifts of days, nights, evenings, stuff like that. But we really were like regular people. We weren't like in barracks and going to, chow and stuff like that. We had to like cook our own meals at home, go to supermarkets, We were like living like regular people with a job. So you had a lot more freedom. We were in the house, you could do what you wanted. You didn't have people watching you.
Curfews and stuff like that.
And we became part of the community. I had neighbors, our house we rented was next to families and things like that. So I really got to know Bermuda and the different lifestyle and different people. I mean, it's primarily, black people living there, and Portuguese and some other nationalities. But they're like, all the police are black. Most of the businesses, our landlord was, So you start to really learn, this is like different than Bayside, that's for sure. Yeah. I was, not just me, but the Navy people, and we didn't wear our uniforms like around town and stuff like that. We just dressed as, we wanted to look as normal as possible and not look like you're in the military, because the Bermudians weren't particularly thrilled that there were all these soldiery type people around. Yeah. Because there was a big air station in Bermuda also. That's actually where the airport is. That was run by the Navy. The Navy built the airport. It was very active in World War II, but even during the time I was there were still military planes there. But I wasn't involved with that. I was at the other end of the island in this little, what was called a naval facility. So it's just basically one big building, and that was checked in, checked out, type of thing. So it was good. That was a really good experience of living in a different world, different, it was British, we'd drive on the wrong side of the road, a lot of different stuff, different people. It's a whole new world. Whereas before I only knew Bayside and Hampton Bays. Those were my two worlds. Yeah. And this was the first time, for like 2 years I was in Bermuda, and that's where I was. So it kind of changed things.
And so how long were you there?
2 years in Bermuda.
2 years, and then...
When I left Bermuda, which would have then been the end of my commitment for active duty, I still had 3 more years of being in the reserves. But when I got out of the Navy, I moved straight into Hampton Bays, into the house in Hampton Bays year-round. So my family, my brother was still around, my mother was still around, but they only would go to the house like at the old days where they would just go in the summer. And my brother wouldn't even go the whole summer. He was like doing other stuff. He went when he felt like it, which wasn't the case when we were kids, when he didn't want to go and was just put in the back of the car and said, "You're going to Hampton Bay." So, and this was my vision even while I was still in Bermuda. What I was going to do was I was going to move into that house. And I also, even while I was still in Bermuda, because I left at the end of the summer of 73, I think. But, I had signed up to go to Suffolk Community College in Selden. So basically that was my plan. When I got out of the Navy, I was going to move to Hampton Bays, go to Suffolk, and start my new life. Which I did at that point. So I moved into that house, was living there year-round.
How was... Because was that like mid-70s or late?
It would have been, yeah, that's what I might think. It was basically in 1973. The summer of 73 is when I left Bermuda. So I was in Bermuda for 71, for part of 71, all of 72, and part of 73.
And how was Hampton Bays at that time after move?
Well, it was the same in the summer, but it's different in the winter. It's much less crowded, even than it. It's a very different place in the winter, and it's also very limited things, things to do. But it was still good. I was happy living there.
What did you go to Suffolk Community College for?
Basically, it was like a community service type of program, which I did for 2 years there. I'd work summer at a bunch of different summer jobs, usually in restaurants and stuff like that. But then after the 2 years there, then I transferred to Southampton College and went there for 2 more years and then got a degree. Also, again, in a community services type of program. It's just generally different things, kind of like it has an edge into social work or planning, things like that. It kind of sets you up for a variety of different jobs to have, which are, in fact, exactly the jobs I did have when I graduated. And I also met my wife in college, and she was in the same programs. So we both were in Suffolk together. I met her towards the end of the time in Suffolk, but then we both went to Southampton together. She actually lived in the house with me also. And we got married actually before we even graduated. So, which was confusing at the end because we both then had the same name, and everybody thought we were brother and sister.
Oh,
So that was like interesting. That was like a separate interesting.
Yeah. And so you were working out in Hampton Bays area. I guess the North Fork came in later, a little bit more later.
Yeah, the North Fork is different. So, so Lydia, that's my wife is Lydia. So when she was growing up, she lived in Oakdale on Long Island. And her family, instead of going to Hampton Bays like I did, they had a boat, and they would at least spend a couple of weeks every year cruising around, traveling around the region. But they would come up through Greenport, go to Mystic, Block Island, the different areas around here on like cruises that they would take on their boat. One summer doing that, the boat broke down while it was in Greenport. So they would regularly come to Greenport, usually staying at Townsend Manor. But this one year they had engine trouble and actually had to replace one of the engines on the boat. So that basically got them stuck here. So it wasn't. So actually, my wife Lydia really liked that better than traveling around. And that basically every weekend taking the boat and going to Fire Island or someplace like that, because again they had the father working and stuff like that. So she spent basically a summer in Greenport, and she really liked Greenport. So that's what really ended up getting us here. And the other thing that got us here was, so we were living in the house in Hampton Bays. And that's all well and good about 8 months of the year. But then when you get towards summertime, then all these family people start showing up. My grandparents would come there. My mother would come there. My brother would come there.
It's like it's getting a little too crowded here.
Right. So she basically said, well, this isn't working for me. And it really wasn't working for me either. So she said, well, we should let's find a place to rent, because we weren't really established. We didn't have real jobs. We were just really out of college. And I'm older than her, so now because I've had this Navy experience, so I'm 4 years older than she is. So she is like on the normal time schedule of a college kid, but I'm older a bit, not by a lot, but. So we found a place to rent right here near where the Alice's Fish Market is.
Mm.
So we rented this little house over there. It cost $100 a month for the
Wow.
year round.
What year was that around?
That would have been like around, that's like, I make sure so I get this right. So it would have been around 77, 78. Yeah, so that's right around in there.
Oh, and she had been to the North Fork,
Yes,
more so, but what were your kind of thoughts on the area when you first came out, and even in Greenport or the North Fork?
Right. Well, really, because I had spent some amount of time like in the Mattatuck-Cutchogue area visiting family, but still never spending any real time. Usually you're stuck in their house or at the beach near their house or something like that.
Yes.
So I also had some friends from Bayside that lived on Shelter Island. So I would go to Shelter Island sometimes too. So I was a little familiar with Shelter Island.
Mm-hmm.
But I really had never come to Greenport other than maybe once or twice with Shelter Island people to maybe go to the movies in Greenport.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really thought of it as a place I particularly wanted to go to. I was very happy with Hampton Bays.
Mm-hmm.
But the family thing, it wasn't my house. So I can't tell everybody you can't come here anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being a good husband as I am, Lydia wanted to come here. And it seemed I didn't have any particular inkling for any other place on the North Fork. So we found this house, and we were here. And I got a job pretty quickly at the marina, at Sterling Harbor Marina.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually right across the creek from where my house was. And I worked there for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she was working at a store in Riverhead, in Rimlands.
Mm-hmm.
It's a department store. Earlier, she had worked at E.J. Corvette's, where her father worked. That was in the middle of the island somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Which it was like a big shopping center. So she had, some of her background was like in retail through college. That's where she was working. She also worked when we were, that last year or the last 2 years when we were in Southampton College, she worked at Pee-wee Department Store in Hampton Bays. I always got a kick out of the name of that department
Pee-wee.
store. Pee-wee Department Store in Hampton Bays, downtown Hampton Bays. So, and that leads into her career, because with her here in Greenport.
Yeah.
Because right off, with that little house we had, she started selling antiques and little, very like little knick-knack kind of things off the porch in the house in Greenport. So that was that whole part of, now we're out of school, out of what are we going to do? We're kind of in Greenport, and here we are. We've arrived.
Yeah.
We're going to fix this town. I mean, I'm joking. With a lot of people when they come here say, "Boy, I know what this town needs," type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
People say that. So,
but even at that time in the mid 70s and on to the late 70s, how was the town in terms of other businesses in the area? Was it, as some people would say, it was a little more sleepy, or it was going through some down phases?
Yeah, it was, I guess, an interesting time. Again, I really didn't know much about Greenport at all when I came here. I was much more familiar with Hampton Bays and Southampton, because I worked summers in those places and things like that. So, and was there a lot. So Lydia was more familiar with Greenport and what's here and what's going on, because not only did she spend that one whole summer, they still would come every summer and spend at least 2 weeks here, because the whole family really, her brother especially also really liked being in Greenport. Yeah. And it made their life a little easier too than just cruising around from place to place. They just came here, stayed here for 2 weeks, and then So, I mean, it was pretty slow, but there was a lot of action kind of going on also. We were here right at the time where a couple of big things happened. There was the Mitchell's fire with Mitchell's restaurant burnt down. So that was a fairly big deal, and then started creating this vacancy in town.
Yeah.
There was our example of finding a low-cost place to live was not a rare thing to happen at that time. There were a lot of houses in poor condition and small or a variety of things that housing there was available housing, but it wasn't particularly good housing. There was quite a bit of poverty or poverty-ish kind of things. It's not like the normal poverty, but just people didn't really have very good jobs, and there weren't a lot of jobs here. Certainly good-paying jobs, and so it wasn't. I wouldn't say a really sleepy town. I mean, for the size of it, there are a lot of people. Relatively speaking, it was congested with housing. It wasn't like South Hold and Mattituck, which is really much more spread out.
Yes.
And I mean, I liked working at the boatyard, but it really wasn't what I went to school for. And I saw an ad in the paper from CAST that they were looking for help at their center that they had here in Greenport, and I applied for that and was hired. So that then began my stretch of like almost 40 years of being involved in
the community
stuff, which is what my college training was technically supposed to do. Get you how to work, and because this was, I think, also a time when there was a lot of new programs with the government, availability of grants. Greenport had a young mayor at that time, Joe Townsend. He was the mayor. I knew him a bit as time went on, but I never worked for him. That's when I was still in the boatyard, and at CAST, he was the mayor then. But after 2 years at CAST, I was then approached, well, I guess approached is right, but I knew him already while I was working at CAST, is Dave Capel, who was, at that time, I think he was hired by Joe Townsend when he was mayor. But it's not that complicated, but there's different, the politics of the village start coming into play because that controlled my life for the next 30 to 40 years. Yeah. So Dave Capel, who knew me from CAST, when I was working in CAST, asked me if I wanted to work for the village in community development with him. He was the community development director. He had got some grants coming in from the federal government and needed like an assistant or someone to help carry out, some of the responsibilities of the grants. Yeah. There was also like a separate kind of joke that that went on for now again 40 years essentially, of you apply for grants, you get a grant, and then you say, well, now what? Now we have to actually do what we said we're going to do in this grant. So now we have the responsibility, we have to do this stuff. It's one thing to say, we're going to build new houses, and we're going to build playgrounds, and we're going to do the drainage. Yeah. We're going to do all these great stuff. You just have to give us, $400,000, and we'll take care of it. So you get the money, and then you say, well, okay, now how are we going to actually do this? Yeah. So that's how that started. Then so I worked with Dave for that was a 12-year stretch basically that started.
And you were in the communication area there. It was the community development office as part of the village of Greenport. But what was interesting is Dave Capel and I were not really paid by the village. We received these grants that included the administrative costs. So all of the costs for what we were doing was paid by the federal government.
we weren't really being paid by the village. I mean, the money would go through the village, but we weren't costing the village anything. And so we had to keep getting grants to stay employed, So we had that pressure on us that, we have to we have to accomplish the goals we said we were going to have in the grant, and then continue to get additional grants to keep it going. So that was a challenge, and that was mostly on him, I have to say. I have to be doing what I have to do and help him, but that falls really to the person in charge, which was him. And we still had to work with the government, the local government. And George Hubbard Sr. was the mayor at that time. And I don't know, I can get into a lot of all the different things we did, but we did a lot of things. A lot of wonderful things.
If you wanted to mention some of the things you kind of worked on at that time.
Well, we certainly did. There were a lot of houses that were in disrepair, and in some cases dangerous. And I think a few years earlier than that, when I was living here, there was a fire in a house on Carpenter Street in which 2 local firemen were killed. They died in that fire. And that was a really pretty dramatic and impactful thing for the community. And I know George Hubbard, who was the mayor, I'm not sure he was the mayor when the fire happened, but he was certainly in the fire department and very involved with Greenport. That really shook him too. I mean, it shook really everybody, especially anybody in power or people in the fire department. And that kind of set this attitude, well, we've got to deal with these houses. Most of the houses had, especially the lower income houses, people had like the nice, houses on Main Street and, the better parts of town. That's a different thing. But a lot of 3rd Street, 2nd Street, the side streets over here, down by where the shipyards were, like Ludlam Place and Carpenter Street. Some of those areas really had some houses in trouble. And so with the grants, we were able to do code enforcement or do inspections of houses, kind of randomly, just like going around, especially if they were rental housing. If it was an owner-occupied house, it was a little harder. But if they were rental housing, we could just say, we're going to inspect this house for safety, do a safety inspection. And that was primarily what my job was at the beginning, was as a code enforcement officer. I had to take a civil service test, have to do a few things with that. But so I was able to do that. And we were also supported by Suffolk County Department of Health. Also, we would sometimes work together in like larger complexes. And we basically started doing these home inspections and coming up with lists of things that had to be done to make the house safe. And with the rental housing, that had a landlord somewhere in the line here, and we would, issue them first warnings, then summonses, or whatever you had to do. And say, look, this house has these problems, and they have to be fixed.
But were these houses that were in these areas, were some of them even abandoned? Or were there still people living in them, renting them, but the landlords just didn't maintain them?
Right. Most of them were houses that were occupied, but had very little care from the landlord, and the landlord wouldn't even really care what would be going on. I mean, there's a variety of situations, but it wasn't rare to have houses where the landlord hadn't seen the house in a couple of years, even. Others that not that bad, that they might be like around, but they certainly don't really care. If they got the rent check, that's all they care about. But and the rents would be low. And many of the houses also had people with public assistance, and that's where the county would step in also, that if we would see one of those houses and there was public assistance involved, then we'd be able to bring in Suffolk County, which has a little more juice than we have in telling a landlord you've got to make these repairs. So that was a big part of what we did. The grants also would often include funds to make repairs to the houses. If they're, like for new heaters, many houses had kerosene heaters, which were really pretty dangerous, especially if they're not maintained, just like any heating system. If you don't maintain it, it's bad. And other, plumbing issues, all types of things that are really health-related, or leaking roofs. Just also we were also kind of had an energy crisis somewhere in there in the 70s. So, fuel was expensive, and the whole idea, you should insulate your houses, get storm windows, storm doors, doing that kind of stuff. So all those kind of things that would improve housing, both the living conditions and the physical structures, was a big part of what that first group, like that 12-year period, which was my first time working with the village in community development, involved. It was mostly with Dave Capel, but in about the last 4 years, Dave went on to being on the village board, and another person, Bill Galuli, was hired. He's from Orient, but had worked for a congressman, so he had some political knowledge. So he was hired to kind of take Dave Capel's place. So I was then working with him. We were a little more equals, as opposed to Dave Capel, who was clearly my boss, and I was working, for him. But as time went on, we were more basically, he did what he did and I did what I did. He would get the grants and I would try to make him work.
Okay.
But we were both out there, in the streets. So for that 12-year period, we were mostly doing housing improvements, drainage, especially 3rd Street and some of the connecting streets. There was a lot of flooding. We would have a lot of floods back then. We would work on parks. Really, the beginning of condos happened there, but we were more. That was a tricky thing, because we had these like broken down shipyards, which wasn't necessarily a good thing to have. But there wasn't really a lot of enthusiasm to either bring back shipbuilding. No one really wanted to do that.
But then,
so the only people who really could take on like a vacant shipyard, like the first one was Sweet's Shipyard, which is down at the end of Bay Avenue in that area over there by the harbor, which was like a really big piece of property, but it was all derelict buildings and, kind of like a hazard, certainly an eyesore. So we had our first condominium application there. So that was, this then brings on a whole nother, the new world of Greenport is starting to develop here now. That's, okay, so these guys are going around, meaning like me and Dave Capel on the one hand. I'll take some credit for it. We're cleaning up the town. We're cleaning up the village. Bit by bit, not really, 100% successful, but doing more than anybody did before, of actively doing things. And putting pressure that they can't stay like this. You're basically telling that to landlords of vacant property or derelict buildings, saying, look, we're not going to allow this. So either you've got to fix it or sell it or do something. And we also started buying property too. We could, with the funds we had, some of that money was, we were able to actually purchase land as long as we committed that we were going to build an affordable house on that property. So we could do that, and we did do that also. But with the shipyard, that's where the world of condominiums showed its ugly head here.
Well, and how were when that application came in, how were the responses from people within the community? Because you said that some of them, they didn't want another shipyard.
Well, no one wanted to build another shipyard.
Build another one, but no one put together an idea maybe to even renovate the buildings that were there and try to do something else with it.
Yeah, that's true. That's what basically happened. That the land sat vacant. I don't really know the deep financial situations that were involved, if the people who actually owned the property, if they even like existed, or if it was like some distant relative now had it, whatever. A lot of the shipyards were hurt. They were either shipyards or oyster factories were the two things that were occupying the waterfront for the most part through the 50s and earlier days. And most of those were closing down left and right. The shipyards were closing and the oyster factories were closing, and even fish factories. And whatever they were, all these commercial waterfront properties were going vacant. And so the first ones were the ones at Sterling Cove, as the condos are called. So they were kind of accepted, and there was just some caution about it. And they wanted, like every developer does, to do really more than what the locals felt they should do. So after a couple of years of fighting back and forth, it kind of settled down to what they actually built. Which I think most people would say it really was fine. It hasn't caused any horrible thing. But what it did do is it now started this trend towards, well, let's take all the shipyards and all the fish factories and turn them into condos. At least that was the thought of the condo developers. And the one who did Sterling, the one I'm pointing at.
Sterling Harbor.
Yeah, the one that's on the creek behind us. That same developer, he then did Oyster Point, which is the other big one that's at the end of 5th Street. And that's also a pretty nice one, but now that was starting to get people concerned because now there's two of them.
It's not just the one, there's more that are coming down the line.
So now it's two. That one had some other different controversies that, that got involved with personalities and things like that. But that one made it also, got approved. But we were now starting to deal with this big master plan, this local waterfront revitalization plan, which most of us in the village were dealing with, putting that together. And that's what pretty much put a stop to putting residential buildings, especially condo-type buildings, on these what were now vacant waterfront commercial properties. So that's this big turnaround. And the last ones that got built were what are called Pipes Cove condominiums there at the end of 6th Street. That's actually a much smaller development, and also has the unique thing of it's half in Greenport and half in Southold Town. So that had to be a combination of both the Greenport and Southold planning and building departments working together to do that project. But that was the last one. So that was it for condos up until what was built 3 years ago or so now over
in the other, by the oyster.
Sterling, right, where the oyster factory was. So that's the only new condominium. I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's the only new one, and it's a kind of small one. It's really just one building that's been built since the LWRP was put into place. So that those zoning changes that made it, you could only put commercial properties. It also was very much what made Mitchell Park able to exist, because that had a few different people over time chomping at the bit to turn that into something that nobody wanted. Nobody who lived here
More
wanted.
Condos or something.
Condos, hotel, club, all types of things that have a big hunk of the waterfront like that. And put something big with gates, that you can't get, it would have completely changed things. And that you really have to give Dave Capel credit for, because he the other board members at the time, including George Hubbard, Senior, were behind it. I mean, no one really wanted those other things to happen. There was even a time there was a ferry, the Moscone Ferry it was called, that wanted to have a ferry dock in that area. And that even got a little bit off the ground, but then was also squashed. But that would have been another thing that would have been a nightmare. It would be similar to what the Cross Sound Ferry is coming into here. It would have been a competition for them, but that would have been another traffic nightmare
Mm-hmm.
downtown. So those were a couple of things that were stopped by these zone changes.
Mm.
So that was important stuff. That
Yeah.
really, that kind of turned, it was, and it's what kind of happens, I guess. We when I started, and again, things were happening already. I don't want to make it seem at all like, once I got here, we got everything straightened out. But I kind of rode that wave, and it was part of what I kind of wanted to do. I mean, it was like really more than I even imagined.
Mm.
I'd be involved with. A lot of it, I wasn't doing it. I was more riding this wave, and just was part of it.
And how long? What year did you finish?
Okay, yeah.
there?
So what was interesting is, I guess, some of my first time that the Dave Capel period was from 1981 to 1993. So that's like 12 years between Dave and Bill Galuli and I working in community development.
Mm-hmm.
And that also was part of with the LWRP being developed, starting to be developed there. Then there was a complete change in in mayor, some of the other trustees and things like that. And there were people who were, I guess, concerned about what was going on with community development, of all this purchases of land and properties. We also implemented the Section 8 rental assistance program during those 12 years, which was also kind of, that worked in conjunction with the rehab of houses, because you could now let landlords increase the rent in exchange for them making improvements for the houses, and the Section 8 program would subsidize the rents of the people living there. So the people wouldn't have to pay anymore. They were still paying a fixed amount based on their income, but they could live in improved houses with the funds for the improvements coming from the federal government. So there were people who, again, I guess somewhat legitimately feeling the government is getting a little too much control of what we can do, because the government sets the housing standards, sets rent prices. There's a lot of things that the federal government is imposing on Greenport in exchange for getting these grants. And there were people who, as the village now is breaking free, as the condos are starting to come and the derelict properties are going away and, things are getting better, let's get rid of the friggin' government. Get them out. We could run this place better than they can. Yeah. So basically Bill Galuli and I were both they just eliminated our jobs. They said, well, we don't need that. We don't need a community development director. We don't need a code enforcement officer. So, sorry. Thanks for the memories. And we were let
the 12 years.
Right. So we were both let go. It didn't really, well, actually, for me, it really wasn't. I mean, I was sad about it, but I really wasn't crazy about the new people coming in anyway. So it would a little bit of, well, I wouldn't want to work for you anyway. But it was actually a kind of, I immediately got a job at the North Fork Housing Alliance, which was part of what CAST was. So I kind of went back in a way to the job I had before.
And just working more in a private sector
more
organization.
in the private sector with North Fork Housing Alliance, but doing very similar stuff with housing assistance, the Section 8 program that they had, because they were tied to Southold Town, but operating not only in Greenport, but throughout Southold Town. So when I was working there, I did that for 5 years with Bessie Swan, who was the director. And I did really pretty similar things to what was going on in I was doing in Greenport. And, she hired me like right away, just as Dave hired me out of the same place. CAST and the Housing Alliance were really like partners in those days. One was mostly human services, which is CAST, and it still is, food, counseling, stuff like that. And the Housing Alliance was what it sounds like. They were providing housing. They did lakeside garden apartments. That was part of that, which also involved the village. A lot of these things were interconnected. So I very easily went there, very happy working working there. That even a similar salary, really wasn't that much different. So I was there for 5 years, again, doing similar stuff. We actually did some good stuff, too. We got involved with the rec center and the child program, the after-school program that's up on the end of 3rd Street now. Now it's a rec center. But that was a lot of these different things that were kind of good things to have, like for early childhood care. So parents could go to work, mothers could work. So that was good. And so that went on for 5 years. And then Dave Capel was the mayor again. No, not again. He was never the mayor before. He was a trustee. Then he became the mayor. And that's when Mitchell Park started to take shape. And Dave basically asked me again if I wanted to work for the village, and I applied. There actually was some competition this time. The first time I was hired, I was just like hired, come on in, just come in here, sign here, type of thing. The second time, when it was for village administrator, I actually had to compete with Rich Caggiano because he was still but his contract was up or whatever, So it was an open job, and then I think there were a couple of other people too who also were interested in the job. So, ended up getting hired for that. So that was good. So I was happy to come back, and I still had my connections with the Housing Alliance, because.
And that was 1990.
Yeah. So that was. Let me make sure I get this right. 1997. So it was with the Housing Alliance from 93 to 97. And then with the village from 97 until 2014, which is when I retired. So that was another 17 years or something, whatever that was. Yeah, so 16 years, I think. So it actually turns out, when you round it all out, it comes out to about 30 years of village employment, and then 7 years of CAST or Housing Alliance employment. And that the second time with the village, a lot of it was Mitchell Park, but there are other things too. The skate park was in there. What was that? Oh, the beginning of our events. We had the 150th celebration somewhere, I think in the first round, by the way. That was one of the first big events in Greenport, because I really was a big fan of events. So that celebration was good. But then...
What about the Maritime Festival?
Yeah, so the Maritime Festival was another event I was very involved with.
When it really early
from
days.
The beginning. Yeah, I guess now this year is the 34th one, and we had the one bad year with because of COVID, we didn't have it. Yeah, so I was always involved with those in one way or another. Sometimes on a very small level. If I was working for with Greenport, you just kind of had to deal with the garbage pails and little organization, but I wasn't that involved with the festival itself. But I always was here, half because it's kind of my job, but also we have a store in Greenport, so if you have a store in Greenport, you should be here during the festival. So I was here for that too, for whatever reason. So I was with all of them.
What you said that your wife was doing some with the antiques out of the house, but when did the business start within the building?
Yeah, that first beginning was right in 79 or so.
Oh.
Right, so that was her parents were more like antique people. They lived in a old house. Actually, it was and this is in Oakdale, and it was one of the Vanderbilt buildings. The Vanderbilts had a huge estate in Oakdale, and this was like one of the outbuildings that they lived in. It was the bowling alley, actually. It had a bowling alley and a room with billiards. So the parents bought this house. I mean, this is after the Vanderbilts are long gone, and it was just like a kind of empty at the time they bought it. So she was in Oakdale, but her parents were like antique, not dealers, but were very interested in old buildings and old stuff, and they would buy, art and things like that. So when this really, I guess I could be on this for like 4 hours. I might break the record or something. But they, when Corvette's closed, E.J. Corvette, which was a big department store in the early days, Lydia's father worked there, and that was he was like pretty, very active in that when it was open. Mm-hmm. But when it closed, he like left. So now he was kind of like, well, what am I going to do now? So he kind of wanted to get into the antique business a bit because he had this house and he had a lot of antiques and he liked antiques and just buying stuff. So kind of he and Lydia kind of teamed up together and started renting first a building in Southold for only about 2 years because it was on the North Road and it really wasn't a very good location. And then we started renting in Greenport and rented a store on Upper Main Street. And then I guess now it's almost 25 years ago, maybe 20 or so, bought the building we're in now, which is what used to be part of the arcade, a separate part of the arcade. So that was the first building that we owned, that building. So it went from the little house, which was really like a nothing thing. It was more like a yard sale. It looked like a yard sale to any normal person. To the store in Southold, which didn't really go very well, but it at least was a real store. And then the one on Upper Main Street, where Lydia was there with her father and mother a bit too. The mother would come, but it was like a family thing. Mm-hmm. But then once we moved and bought the building, then they still had a little bit of involvement, but they were getting old now, and we'd just come and have tea and stuff like that. They weren't really part of the business so much anymore. Mm-hmm. And Lydia was really kind of on her own, and I really didn't have much to do with it either, just like helping out, moving stuff and things. Yeah. And so that's still going on now. So we still have that. So so that's a good thing. So
yes. And then back to you with the village administrator. You said you were working a lot with the Mitchell Park
that was
project.
Yeah.
But were there any other issues or opportunities that you were focusing on as well at that time?
Yeah, there were definitely other things. Well, the museum was already kind of together, but and there were other things with the railroad dock. I think that was in the earlier days also, that the commercial dock was changed. Mitchell Park was certainly the driving force. We did other stuff with the downtown. We did business improvement. There's the BID, the Business Improvement District, but we also had some county grants that were doing renovations and to storefront improvements. We did an expansion of the arcade back around that time. There was, some of the other businesses were being developed. I'm trying to think which ones.
This was after the. There was also the police. That was earlier.
The police was at the very beginning of the Capel years. Yes. So that would have been in that mid-90s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because when I worked for the village the first time, the police were here. When I came back the second time, they weren't here anymore.
Yeah.
So that went out during that period. I think it was mostly driven by Dave Capel as the mayor, but it was really driven by the behavior of some of the police officials without getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
And it was also a financial thing too. It was
save $1 million.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the math was, but it was expensive to maintain a police force.
Yeah,
and especially if a lot of people felt it wasn't really doing the job and was creating legal problems and the village didn't really like need it, you know, and it was a little bit of a bold step, but there wasn't a lot of opposition to it. I mean, there was some opposition, but when the dust settled, it was felt to be okay. I know it.
But even I think that people were saying that they still were worried about how Southold Town Police would handle if they would come over and help, and then I think there were still some probably drug problems and other fights or altercations that might happen.
Yeah, it was like a little bit of a rough town.
Yes.
You know, and really on both in the earlier days, when we had to do these inspections, these housing inspections, that wasn't necessarily an easy thing, because there were situations where there's gambling going on, prostitution, drugs in some of these houses,
Mm-hmm.
and we would have to get, you know, police support. Or we even had search warrants a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go in along with police, and usually the bigger ones would also involve Suffolk County, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
health department, you know, for those kind of safety things.
Yeah.
You're going in for that, but then what you find, you never know.
Don't know what's going to...
When you open the door, you know, because there really was. There certainly drugs, certainly prostitution, and just, you know, gambling, all kinds of stuff, you know
Yeah.
that would be going on. So yeah, that was not good. And I guess our police, the Greenport police, I mean, like every group of people, I mean, there were some guys that were really like good, you know, they really wanted to be, you know, good police officers, but
Yeah.
it was more at the top. I know, again, you know, not with getting into names, but there was certainly a detective who was not a good guy, and the chief, I really liked him, but he also had some, you know, feelings of, I guess I can get away with this and that. You know, I'm the police chief. You know, it's almost, you get a feel of what they joke about down south and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
You know. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, that was interesting. I kind of stayed like back from that a little bit. And so personally, I think once the town took it over and got over the idea of it, you know, now we have to deal with Greenport.
Yeah.
You know, I think they're doing a good job now. A little an interesting thing is at that time, I'm in the gap between my two times in the village, I moved to Cutchogue, which is where I live now, and I live right across the street from Wickham's fruit farm.
Oh.
And the present Wickham, his name will come to me, was the town supervisor during that time when Dave Capel said, "Okay."
Was it Tom?
Tom, yes, thank
Tom
you.
Wickham.
Tom Wickham. Basically told Tom Wickham, "Okay, look, you're the police now in Greenport." Basically, he said, and Tom Wickham came to me because I'm basically right across the street. I mean, he like knew me. You know, I knew him from now living there. He said, "So, like, what's going on? Like, what's with Dave Capel? Can you explain him to me?" You know, like he was like befuddled by Dave a little bit. You know, I probably, maybe this is where I'm getting into something that might not be the best thing, but I know he was like concerned, but it really all worked out. So I guess the end result is that I guess Dave Capel and Tom Wickham were two very different people.
Yes.
And you know, from really two different worlds. So it did work out, but I was just, you know, that stuck with me, him coming over to me, you know, in my house. And,
saying, what's going on?
You know, like hoping I would have the answer, you know, and I really didn't.
Yeah.
You know, because technically I really wasn't, I don't think I was actually employed. I wasn't employed by the village during that crossover.
That period. Oh, okay.
So, yeah, and I left before. So I moved to Cutchogue right at the time when I was leaving the village the first time and working,
From the community.
going back to the,
Yeah.
So it was, so that was a different thing. But, yeah. So.
No.
But yeah, the police thing, I wasn't like in the middle of that.
You were kind of like seeing kind of, what's going on from the side.
Yeah.
No, and then even after Mitchell's Park, what else were you working on? Because you were there, I mean, till 2014.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so actually it was basically done.
That was...
Yeah, I mean, it was done really almost in 2010, that it was, for the most part, the park was finished. There was still things going on. We built a second bathroom afterward, and we were making improvements to the marina. Things like that were going on. But the park was basically done. Once all the main structures and everything were there, that's when I think Dave Capel felt comfortable. He really wanted to see it through, because it was a struggle, as it was going. We were on the edge of running out of money any number of times, and we still had to keep getting more funds in, and we were selling village property. I don't want to say left and right, but a number of village properties were sold to bring money in to help pay for the cost of getting the park finished.
Yeah.
So that was still happening. But it was kind of, I was involved with the building department. It was kind of, the village had kind of settled down into what it's going through now, just still people buying and renovating houses. We had an initiative for a while to allow single-family houses to be two-family houses easier, which I think is coming around now again in the village. So we did these smaller things to try to deal with the rising costs of housing, especially rental housing. So that's been going on, and still is going on.
But even in 2000 and 2010, it was still pretty affordable to some people, but it was obviously rising.
Yeah, it was what was some of the things that you could tell it was going to be a problem. We would often joke, even in the 70s and early days, that all you have to do is go over to the South Fork, and whatever's going on there is going to happen here in 10 or 15 years. So it was like a joke, but it was kind of true. Yeah. And then when we started seeing realtors, there are South Fork realtors opening offices over here, that was another big signal that people are going to Southampton, East Hampton, West Hampton, basically go to South Fork, and saying, I want to get a house on the water somewhere. They come from the city, just like this, we all did.
Yeah.
And they say, well, we got this one, but I have one in Cutchogue that's just like this. Also on the water, have a dock and everything like that. And it's 20% less, or 30%. You get the same house over there than you can here. And even more the case in Greenport, because Greenport was still basically about the lowest prices. Partially because we had little lots. A lot of Southold and Mattituck are like 1 acre or 2 acre lots. We are like 10,000 square feet. You have a big lot in Greenport. So it would seem like it's a lot cheaper, but they were often smaller houses and definitely smaller lots in Greenport. But so those South Fork people were getting directed over here, and now we have mostly, I think Dave Capel is one of the few, private real estate offices. That
all the other ones are big.
Are companies.
Yeah.
And actually, my cousin Wayne Abatelli had probably the next to last one in Cutchogue, that he had an Abatelli Insurance there, Abatelli Insurance and Real Estate in Cutchogue, which he was the grandson of the guy who came over with my father in 1920. So those were like, he was one of the first. He was one of the first. The Abatelli Real Estate was among the first real estates, especially one that they also had one in Queens. So he was like a branch. He had the North Fork branch.
Wow.
So it was kind of a two-location realtor.
Yeah.
So that's really getting into the weeds, but but it's just interesting. I think with Dave Capel, that I think he's might be the last independent
real estate.
Real estate. I think he's tied in with one of the bigger companies. What is it? Sotheby's.
Okay.
I think is in there, but he's still mostly an independent guy. And it used to be just those kind of people around in real estate.
But even, because I think a lot of people would say that that time that Capel came in was a turning point, and with things improving and attracting more people. But was there a point where it was like, in terms of when people talk about gentrification and how do you kind of control it without it getting out of control, in terms of today we look at it, it seems, well, just housing in general across the country has gotten really expensive in certain parts. But in terms of from 2000s to now, and thinking about the area then and what it's become, do you think it was still an important thing to try to renovate that area where Mitchell's was, and even looking back at to where the oyster and the fishing places, that was another thing that started with the one condo, and then they're kind of seeing those as points of change in Greenport. But then looking at Greenport today, what do you think of those areas? And I mean, there could have been other options, but at the time, that's kind of what you're kind of working with, or what the village was working with.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were trying almost anything. I mean, when I was around or not, you know, and with even with the different agencies, you know, we did that garden apartment complex. You know, there was a junkyard before that.
Yeah.
You know.
What was that?
Capobianco's junkyard was there, but it's Lakeside Garden Apartments now.
Okay, that I think, was that where a lot of kids would say they would go play in there, or maybe that was another junkyard. What was that other affordable housing development that was built after the war?
Driftwood Cove.
Driftwood Cove. I think a lot of high school kids would go play in there after. But I mean, I hear other people saying junkyards around Greenport, but that was...
Well, actually, this is another just interesting tidbit, Greenport. The idea, we got to go way back, and this is really even before my day, but being told. Greenport used to be the epicenter of junkyards. I think there were 5 or 6 junkyards in Greenport. So we were the headquarters for junkyards.
Yeah.
And that's when people would these are ends of roads that this is okay for you to just dump out whatever you want. And that was in our early days of cleanup, one of the things that we were dealing with, including where Lakeside Gardens is, that we condemned that property and then had it, and then had to do a whole cleanup of it and things like that, and then build the apartments there. That was done through Farmers Home Administration. And that was the thing, again, where there was a combination of Greenport, and I guess it was either CAST or the Housing Alliance, but it was Bessie Swan. Has she come up in any of your things? But anyway, Bessie Swan was really a leader in the Black community.
Okay.
And very smart woman, very nice woman. I mean, she hired me twice. Or what can I say? Just like Dave Capel. So she worked with the village with a lot of these different things. Because she is good at running. On when she was here, she I think has moved to Washington actually now, or Virginia. But she was very important also in a lot of what was going on, because she was very smart. I think she had a doctorate, and is like a leader in the minority community, and she would have a lot of ideas, and she would push us, and we would respond. I know Dave Capel and I mean, some of the politician-y more people didn't really like kind of being pushed, but we were. And that's kind of part of our job anyway, is to be between the people and the politicians to try to soften the conversation,
Yeah.
She would tell us what we should do, and then we would soften it a little bit when we went to the mayor and say, this is what she wants to do. We'd make it sound a little more doable.
Yeah.
But I think kind of, as I said earlier, and I really think this was important, was when the two firemen died. Mm-hmm. That really woke up people, that you can't just roll along the way
leave
things,
this stuff.
You can't let it just by the wayside. You got to take action, not to let something like this happen again. Mm-hmm. So, and I think often it does take a crisis or something to just get over the top, of committing to, okay, well, let's take in this government money, let's get involved with the government, because we can't do it ourselves with what we have. And so,
what about looking back at your time as the village administrator? What do you think was the most challenging part of your job?
I guess keeping everybody happy.
Because I mean, there were tensions, obviously, probably.
Yes, there were a lot. There were a lot with money, because everything was costing more than we thought it would cost, and it was coming along well. I mean, most people liked it, but it was getting hard to make it all work, and even things like the marina. The marina we got the money for the marina because it was going to be a transient marina, meaning that boats could only stay there for up to a maximum of 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And we were and pushing it to the government, both the state and federal government, was that we're going to be bringing people from Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts and other parts, not only from Long Island, but from other states, to bring money into Greenport. So as they come in here, they come on a boat, they can't go anywhere, they're trapped in the village, and there's going to be boatloads of money coming in, and it's all going to, spread out through the community. And then once the marina opened, we really weren't getting any boats coming. It was hard to get a lot of people to come here, because there were other marinas that people could stay at, just for a week or two, like my wife did when she would come to Townsend Manor and stay for a couple of weeks. And the docks would be empty, and people would say, "Look, I spent like $2 million." I think altogether, I'm not sure what. Probably Dave did the math at one point, Dave Capel, but I think it was about $16 million. It's somewhere in that neighborhood for the park, is what the park cost. So people would say, you spent millions of dollars on this marina, and it's all pretty and nice, but, there's no boats in it, So we had to really work at, advertising and promoting it and getting ways for boats to come in. And it started to work. We started having, clubs, we reach out to clubs. We had this trawler fest a couple of times, which was bringing a lot of trawlers here, trying to get creative ways for business to come to the marina. We also, in that later time, and this could be one of those things that thanks a lot kind of thing, was we upgraded the electric on the big pier, because the big yachts didn't want to come here unless they could get electric. If they had to run their generators or do that kind of stuff when they're here, then this wasn't their kind of place.
To attract bigger.
So to attract these bigger yachts that actually are a really good financial benefit to the village, that, some people, kind of even a little bit, including me, I'm not that thrilled to have all these, yachts. The original idea was to have tall ships, or maybe even like small cruise ships that are coming and, dropping a group of people off, like they do the cruises, along the coast. And we had a little of that, but it never really caught on. And that's more what we would have wanted to do. Even the ferry idea, the ferry to Sag Harbor, that was also one of the things we kind of were pushing to try to do in those older days, in those early 20s, to just get, action. You got to have things going on. You can't just have the place looking like a ghost yard. So that was actually one of the challenges. I mean, the carousel was good. I mean, but that didn't make a lot of money. And then we had the ice rink, which also was a good thing, but that has a lot of problems too, because it's too warm here.
Maintenance and it's warming.
Yeah, it's really not the best weather conditions for an ice rink.
Mm-hmm.
And, so those were both things. The carousel is clearly a success, but, we're still raising the rates. We just raised the rates again now just to help it stay on its feet. But it's certainly popular, and that's a success. There's no two ways around it. And the marina is also a success now. It's getting there. It takes a while, but that makes money. Both of those, the carousel and the marina, make more money than they cost. So they propel really the bulk of the whole recreation department. Paying for other things, taking care of the parks, and even the campground. That was another thing we were involved with, was improving the campground on Moores Lane. That's another thing that does make money. So generally it's not easy for villages to make money, to have profits and things. So
and even after working for the village, you're also co-chair of the East End Seaport Museum.
Right, yeah. Well, what was kind of cool in a way, when I retired, I was involved with like the Greenport bid. I would go to most of their meetings when I was working for the village. I would be involved with the museum because the village is the landlord of that building, of the museum building. So they would come to me like the roof's leaks or this is, so I would be involved, and be helpful. I was involved with all the grants to build it in the first place. So I knew about it, and some of the other things that I was involved with that I liked, the trees, I got like tree committee things, just a variety of things. That once I retired, these groups like the Greenport bid reached out to me and said, well, now that you're retired, why don't you join the bid? So I joined the bid, and I was a member now of the bid up until last year, where I was on the board of the bid. I even was the director for 3 months. That was the worst experience I've had working here. But I left the bid, and I was, happily, and I'm still on the beautification committee that's involved with the planters and stuff like that, which we're all getting new planters, by the way, in the next 2 weeks.
Nice.
Big success. We've been trying to do that for a couple of years. So I'm still involved with the bid. With the museum, I also, became a board member of the museum, and I've been doing that. And I'm on the carousel committee. That's another thing. So these were all things I liked when I worked for the village. I'm able to still connect with the good parts of my job that I'm happy to do without getting paid and just doing work.
Yes.
Even the Green Hill Cemetery, I'm on that board.
Okay.
I've never lost anybody from that. That's been a success too. Not very much happens up there.
Okay, that's good.
So that's that's another thing I'm involved with.
But then you're the chairman of the Maritime
Festival, yeah, and that's only by seniority, basically. Really not, just because I really have been to almost everyone, if not everyone.
It's had to evolve a bit from its kind of earlier days in terms of. Some people might be critical of it and how it's changed, but in terms of how do you kind of still support it and attract people to it and vendors, and what do you think of it kind of today? And
yeah, well, that's actually a good question, and it's gone through a lot of different changes. It also has the lighthouse, the Bug Light or Long Beach Bar lighthouse as part of the museum. Also.
Yes, and that I think,
and the blacksmith shop also.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are parts like everything, just like there are parts that personally I really like or I'm proud of. I wasn't responsible at all for the lighthouse being built, but I was around and was there, and was watching it and supporting the idea. So it's nice that I like those things, and we're holding on to that. The festival is a challenge, and part of it is good. My primary role, though, has always been more the logistics of it, and not so much dealing with the vendors. And some of the complaints it gets is the vendors, can be all, a hodgepodge of different things. So everybody's not going to like some of the vendors.
Mm-hmm.
It has become, and we're really trying to calm it down. It's not something we aim for. Is a little bit too much of a drinking party. A lot of people feel it's not that great, because we allow people, open consumption, on the streets and stuff. So those are things that are kind of negative. But we are trying, and certainly not only me, but most of the board members, and we have quite a few new board members that I'm really excited about. And we're really trying to do some kind of interesting stuff. We have a pretty good summer youth program going on. We have some nice exhibits. We had this really nice aquarium last year. So there's some stuff we're doing pretty well. With the boat exhibits, what's one of my favorite parts of it is, we try to have this classic boat exhibit. And that's going well. So far this year, I think we have a 130-foot schooner that's going to be here for the festival. Actually, it's coming early and leaving late, so it's going to fill up, about 6 or 7 days. They're doing,
wow.
And this is a legitimate, restored 1800s schooner, 130 feet, the Ernestina Morrissey, it's called. It's owned at this point now by Massachusetts Marine College, whatever they exactly call it. But yeah, so that's going to be here. We may have this restored oyster boat that's actually in Oyster Bay right now. That's just a recently renovated boat that I think we might have come. So, and a lot of our local wooden boat people that, do restorations, because we do have actually, there's 3 wooden boat restoration businesses in Greenport, which is really kind of a good thing. And they all participate in the festival. So that's some of the good stuff, because we're grabbing, holding on to the history.
Yes.
So that's, the more we're able to do that, and the less we're doing people selling, trinkets and,
Yeah.
I mean, we've had sometimes people selling really ridiculous things. We try to keep it a little maritime-y.
Yeah.
But then we get some pushback from the businesses, because we probably have 10 stores that sell T-shirts that say Greenport on them. So if we bring in more vendors selling more T-shirts, it kind of, those are some of the conflicts we do get with the local businesses. That some of the vendors compete with the local businesses.
Yeah.
So that's hard. But we've also had some that come as a vendor. The one Salt Water is a good example. The only one I could think of is that came as a vendor, but now have opened a store in Greenport.
Yeah.
So that we introduced them to Greenport, and they actually then came here and established the store. So that has to be considered. I would take that as a win.
Yes.
So.
And I was also curious about just your personal views on Greenport today, and what, or even it can be the North Fork too in general, but what do you think are kind of 3 challenges that you feel that are priorities for the area?
Yeah, well, certainly the housing is one. I mean, I have a 32-year-old daughter I'm still basically, or me and Lydia, actually probably in some ways more Lydia than me even at this point, are basically supporting her. We're providing her with where she's living. We're helping her with that. And some of her expenses. And she's, working, but is, not doing great, and it's hard, it's hard for her to get, a really good job. I mean, she ends up, working in restaurants and, different kind of
It's hard for a younger person. I know a lot of the people coming out of high school, they end up moving somewhere else because it's tough to make it out here in terms of jobs, and you might have to know someone that, or like a family that has a house.
Yeah, you need to be helped. I think it's very hard for someone just to like get on the train and come out here and say,
Yeah.
I've arrived, let me find a place to live and get a job. And, I mean, I think people do that in New York. I don't know, I can't imagine it, but I think some people, I guess you have to have some amount of money to get started. But to even just find the opportunity, to do it isn't easy. So certainly housing is right up there. Trying to keep, I mean, these are not by any stretch like ideas I just came up with. This is stuff that's been drilled into me for 40 years. The land preservation, I think we're really doing a good job with that as much as anybody can. And I think generally the zoning laws are going in the right direction, being stricter about what you can do. They can't just, I was just reading today with Strong's Marina and what they want to do. They have this big expansion they're trying to do. And I think just in general, anytime a commercial business wants to go into residential or even worse, anything like farmland or open space is like a bad idea, no matter what they want to do. So there's things that people shouldn't even take the time to ask for some things that people ask for. Endlessly bigger houses doesn't really help anybody. I see that's happening, even like down the street from me in Cutchogue, so it's everywhere, that I said, like where it once was a little house, there's now going to be a big house, and there's still a couple of little houses near it, it's just, that's not something any of us should really be that thrilled about.
Yeah.
I would see that in Greenport too, that people, I know it's happening, it still happens. People buy something and there are rules of what they can build. I mean, they know before they spend the money what is allowed and what isn't, but they like buy it anyway and just say, well, I'm just going to fight them until I get what I want or something close to it. And that's, I wish there was a way you can just like not have variances. That's a dream, but should just say we're not granting variances. So these are what the rules are. So if you can't get your house to fit in where it's allowed, then don't buy it.
Yeah. It can also be in terms of just making sure you keep the character of the area, environmental issues down the line, and do we need this level square footage of housing out here? Right. When it's already tight as it is.
Yes, exactly.
So,
yeah, I mean, I was involved. Again, these are all things like I'm involved because I would be involved, but it wasn't like my idea necessarily, and there were other people. But the whole establishing a historic district, that was in that first round. My first was in the village.
Was that 70?
That would have been in the 70s, that we established that.
Because I think before that there wasn't any real...
No. It was a law we passed. First, there was a lot of research done. That actually started with Joe Townsend, so that's getting into the 60s, of doing this big survey of all the properties in Greenport and getting their historic, their records, and established into this whole thing, which I know the library has part of that, the whole historic district and the survey of every building in Greenport. And that was then used to get the national register, to get it on the national register, which is important. But then you still have to have local laws, and that comes out of that process. But then we passed local laws very much based on what East Hampton has. East Hampton has a very strict historic preservation district. And I remember we went, a couple of times to their meetings and their actual meetings, and then also meeting with their people, their board members, to learn, what the ups and downs and the challenges you're going to have and who's going to be fighting you and, how to do it. And we learned a lot from that. And we did that. And that is helping us, I can't imagine how many houses we've saved that wanted to be something different. So,
and even that was an important part, just to start that. And was there moments where they wanted, because I think even now people talk about, well, can't you expand it even more now to include other areas that they're like, oh, well, that should be a part of the history.
Yeah, and you can, but the people, that's the trick is, in the first place, you can't, I don't want to say you can't, it's difficult to impose it on someone. You can offer it to them. But if someone doesn't want, if you have your house and you're living in it and it's not in a historic district now, and you want to put them into it, you can't. I think, and again, I'm not that much of an expert of how much it's going to take for them to fight it, but it can be fought and can be won, I guess, in some circumstances.
You mean if the village approved an expansion, but then say one house would still stay out?
I think it's feasible. It's feasible that they could pull that off, and generally, it's not popular to impose that stuff. Because even when we did it in the first place, and it wasn't a whole area, but I think there might have been some exceptions. That also happened with the bid district when the bid district is established. That has specific lines because there are benefits and disadvantages. And with historic, there are benefits of grants and things that you can get if you're in a historic district. So there are good things about it. And even sometimes the property value goes up because you're in a historic district. If you're selling to a person who cares about what the building looks like and what the buildings around him looks like, because people, if you have a historic house and you have a lot of other historic houses, you feel like you're in a little historic community. But if then someone puts up an all glass, completely different kind of building, it kind of throws the whole feel off.
Yeah. No, so like you had housing, land preservation, and was there anything else that you feel is important?
First of all, I'm not in the cutting edge anymore. I mean, I don't go to village board meetings at all. I rarely even watch them on the computer. One of the things I don't miss is going to a lot of meetings. I used to go to a lot of meetings when I worked for the village. So I was involved with the zoning board, planning board, historic board, a lot of the committees, plus the village board meetings. I went to a lot of meetings.
You don't miss that.
No. And on top of that, as a building inspector, I used to go to a lot of fires, too, because I would get called out for fires. Often I had other people that could go, but I was also always the last call. Like if someone else didn't go, I would have to go. Because, whenever there's a fire, you have to declare that it's safe to go back into or not safe. So you have that thing. So I didn't really like that either.
Yeah.
So, no, it's the meetings, I didn't, in some ways I didn't mind meetings, but it would get, when I retired, that was certainly something that I was happy to not have to do that anymore. I still go to some.
Yeah.
I also joined the Lions Club after I retired.
Oh, okay.
I separated myself from that.
Yeah.
I still go to the car show, but I don't really get involved with all the other stuff that goes on. I didn't need that.
Yeah. But so I forgot to put it on here, but there was another question just about, I've asked people if they miss anything about the way Greenport or the North Fork used to be, and some people have said no, and other people have said, well, I missed used to be a hardware store in Greenport, or we used to see not as, it felt more like a community back then, or there used to be less figuratively and with fences and other things going up, and other people just wanting it to not lose some of its character. But is there anything that?
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. Yeah, yes. I mean the idea, and that's all kind of with different development, at new houses and things like that. The fence thing is a good example. A lot of times, and I would these are things I would get involved with, is when someone buys a property and there's a hedge or a fence or a tree or some kind of thing that's on or near the property line, a shed, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
People, when they buy, very often, I shouldn't say people, but most of the time when someone buys a property, they want every single inch of what they bought to be theirs. Mm-hmm. And if there's some kind of conflict with a driveway that part of it crossed over or things like, it becomes like a big drama. Mm-hmm. And we would get, quite a few times that kind of thing that really shouldn't be an issue comes out, because in the old days they really were pretty loose with that.
Mm-hmm.
Old surveys used to have plus and minus on them all the time. You don't do that anymore. I mean, like GPS stopped that.
Yeah.
But that was really like a common thing. So you could have a survey like even from like 1950 or something, and it would have plus or minus, meaning that it's somewhere around here is the property line. You can't pinpoint it. And those would be, so it's that kind of an attitude of this is mine, I can do what I want, and this is stay off my land, type. So those kind of feelings of the much more close enough attitude, which I'm pretty much a close enough kind of guy, in general, that is a problem. And it does happen with new businesses, that
new people come in
and they feel I should do it. This is how it should be done. So don't tell me how to run my business. Kind of thing, So yeah, but it probably happened in the old days too. But but it was like different. It's like
it might have been worked out differently.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It was like with a gun or something.
Yeah. It's like, all right, take it out to the street.
I mean, I think one of the things, I was thinking about this before, of like when the government stepped in, when we had more government money, because even through the park, there was a lot of government money, prevailing wage and all that kind of stuff. A lot of it is a burden, but people feel that that's also a, infringement on freedom of, I want to be free to hire whoever I want. When we had to hire contractors to do renovations of houses where we were using federal money, we had to look for minority. We had to show we were at least reaching out to minority contractors or women-owned, businesses. There are a lot of strings attached to the different funds that we would get, and we had to follow those rules, or they could come back, and this happened a couple of times, that they would come back and say, you've got to give us back this money, even if we spent it already. It was happening a few times we would get money to demolish a house or buy a property, and then that property just sits there. And we would, we have to, keep track of these things, and they would say, like, you have these 3 properties here that they've been sitting here for 5 years. You've got to do something, or just give us, then you owe us, $20,000, whatever it was. So those kind of things did come up, and it's not a bad thing, because it's true. If you're saying you're doing this for this purpose and you're not doing it, then, we're going to get you. And
so there's always, there is some where you have more limitations that way, but then you get more money that way. But
and if you're sincere, which I think we felt we were, most of the people, it's a very small minority that really thought that a lot of this stuff was bad that was going on.
Yeah, but was there anything you miss about Greenport or the North Fork when you, like maybe even in the 70s, or 80s, like you don't see now? Or
I mean, I kind of like it now.
You like it? Yeah. It seems like it's gone.
I think it's going okay. I mean, especially because I do remember how really run down and beat up things were,
Yeah.
and if you feel there's crime now, there was really a lot more crime then, and a lot of it was a lot permitted crime. Generally, I mean, the smaller stuff.
Yeah.
Even like people had a lot of animals. We would have chickens running around, dog. We had a dog problem for a while. We had to have a dog catcher.
Wow.
Those were kind. It was kind of a little Wild Westy.
Yeah. That's what people say. It was a little wild.
We had this period with the commercial fishermen, where there would be pretty regular fights, in some of the bars.
When they come back.
Yeah, they come back and spend money,
I think people said there used to be, compared to how many bars there are today, there were a lot more.
There were a lot of bars, yeah. and also, prostitution really was, this was a place, if you're a sailor, this is where you want to come in, and it was, I guess, like I mentioned before, I mean, that we would run into when we were trying to straighten things out, gambling also. There are places that had, like gambling machines and, stuff in apartments.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, they say, is victimless crimes, kind of, I guess, which is sort of true, but it's, not really, not if you're a neighbor and you have that going on,
Next door, yeah.
So...
I just heard, I think, like 2 other questions. What have you enjoyed about living and working on the North Fork over this time?
I don't know. I mean, I really like it here. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I went to Bermuda for a week.
Yeah.
And I came back. I was really happy to come back. And I really like Bermuda. I mean, I lived there. I went back more for like memories and stuff like that. And, I've been actually there a few times since I went when I was in the Navy. But I was really very happy to get back. So I like it here.
Yeah. And what do you hope for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line?
I guess to just like slow down, the more.
Well, there's progress.
I think we're evolving pretty. I mean, there are some really. I mean, the cold wine thing is that's like a good thing. I mean, that was good. We had horses, but there was like a little burst of horse farms. But the wine industry, at least so far. I mean, maybe some complaints about the people that come, younger people, and really getting drink and partying it up. But I think by and far the wine industry is a good thing, and it's certainly preserving the land. Even now, there's more and more, like with the cows around, cows and other. I think all that is really, really good of making the farms, finding ways for the farms to succeed as farms. Within Greenport, it comes down to, I mean, look, you can't really build anything else here, so if anything is coming down, you're going to replace it. Hopefully the last shipyard we have can somehow be preserved. I hope that's able to be done, and that doesn't become a hotel or some other, wild thing, that it can be used as something productive that the whole village could enjoy, like maybe even like a lab or something like that, or another different kind of museum, maybe something that could generate jobs. And I was in North Carolina. My brother spent a lot of time in North Carolina. His daughter's there, and they have a very close to where I was staying, a community college that has a boat building facility that was, probably a property not much different than what Steve Clark's yard is, Greenport Yacht and Shipbuilding. That something like that, would be like great. That could teach any variety of things. It wouldn't have to just be boat building, but some kind of a school or facility that both could manufacture things or provide training and have something like that.
That would be much better than, like you said, a hotel or something else that we don't really need more of. Something that's education based and even linking it with even a university or something that would have marine-based.
Right. Yeah, even stuff that Cornell kind of does.
Yeah.
You would hope that we'd be able to manipulate something. And I think I know they're working on an update of the LWRP, the waterfront plan. And if you put the stuff into those and you get it approved and you get, it kind of can force it to happen. I mean, people will say you're stopping progress, but you're focusing progress, not stopping it, so.
Yeah. No, and then was there anything else you'd like to discuss or say that we haven't talked about?
I probably could, but I think anybody who's listening, anybody who listened to this from the beginning to the end, I'm not even sure my mother, were she still alive, would be able to do it. I know my wife and daughter aren't going to listen to this.
People could do it in segments. No, I think that was really interesting, and I think we covered a lot of stuff within the town, especially between the 70s and 2000. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in today and tell your story and all your involvement and continued involvement in the community through the Eastern Seaport Museum and the Marine Foundation.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what that stands for. I think it allows us to be able to raise money from a different angle.
Okay.
It kind of helps the lighthouse, I think.
Yes.
Because we have different things that we're involved with, so we don't spend lighthouse money on fish food in the museum. You got to kind of keep stuff separated.
Yeah. No, but thank you so much, and it was really, really nice talking with you today. Well,
I appreciate it, and thank you for helping me through this. I was really pretty nervous initially of what would happen.
No, you were perfect.
Well, thanks. Thanks again.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 52 with David Abatelli. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.